paradrama tales.
At the family Christmas gift exchange, I gave my brother a sealed envelope, 3 months of rent, paid in full. He opened it, smirked, and said, trying to compensate for not being needed. Huh. The room exploded with laughter. That's when I knew I wasn't family. I was funding it. I handed him the envelope with no note, no ribbon, no theatrics, just 3 crisp stacks of hundreds clipped and ready. Enough to cover his rent for 3 months. A practical gift, one that could buy him peace, privacy, or, at the very least, time. He didn't even bother to look me in the eye, tore it open like it was junk mail. And then, with that smug half-smile he'd perfected over years of doing nothing and still being praised, he said it loud enough for the whole family to hear. Tries to compensate for the fact that he's not needed by this family. And they laughed. Not awkward chuckles or polite confusion, real belly-deep laughter. My dad clapped. My mom giggled behind her hand like she was back in high school. Aunt Sharon actually wheezed. Someone muttered savage like this was a roast instead of a holiday dinner. I stood there holding an empty mug frozen in place like a prop in someone else's punchline. No one said thank you. Not even a nod of acknowledgement that what I gave could have paid someone's groceries for weeks or kept the heat on through February. Jake didn't say anything else either. Just let the envelope dangle in his hand like it had no value at all. And that was when I realized I wasn't seen as generous. I was seen as predictable, reliable, a permanent fixture in their financial landscape. The family ATM. I reached forward, took the envelope back slowly, and slipped it into my coat pocket. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't get dramatic. I just said 3 words that felt heavier than anything I'd said all year, useful to know. The laughter stopped instantly, like someone had cut the music at a party. That moment, quiet, unceremonious, was the start of something. Not revenge, not drama, just clarity. The kind that comes when humiliation burns hot enough to cauterize old wounds. And standing there, coat half-zipped, surrounded by people who claimed to love me, I understood something I'd been avoiding for years. It's not just what you give that defines your place in a family. It's how they treat you after they've taken it. Those 3 words, useful to know, hung in the air like smoke. Nobody moved at first. It was as if they were all waiting for the punchline to finish, for the old me to come back and laugh along like I always did. But I didn't. I reached for my coat, slid the envelope back into my pocket, and zipped it closed. Every move was calm, measured, because inside I wasn't angry. I was done. My mom was the first to speak. "Oliver, don't do this. It was just a joke." Then Dad chimed in, more annoyed than apologetic. "Come on, he didn't mean anything by it. Sit down. Eat something." The others followed like a chorus of guilt and gaslighting. "You're overreacting. Don't ruin Christmas. Jake, you know how he is." Exactly. I did know. That was the problem. What they didn't know was that I had already reached my limit. Months, no years of paying their bills, buying their groceries, fixing their leaks, wiring rent, and getting maybe a half-hearted thanks if that. Every time their lives unraveled, I was the safety net. And yet, here they were mocking me for the very thing they depended on. I looked around that living room, plates of half-eaten food, twinkling lights, the faint echo of carols in the background. And it hit me how small I had made myself to fit into this version of family. So I did something that felt like a rebellion in the softest, most powerful way possible. I stood up, walked to the front door, and left it open behind me. No dramatic exit, no slammed doors. Just the cold winter air wrapping around me like freedom. I could hear them behind me, voices rising in confusion and protest. But I didn't look back. I didn't have to. I wasn't trying to make a statement, I was reclaiming my silence. Because sometimes walking out isn't about anger. It's about finally choosing yourself. And in that quiet, snowy night with Christmas lights flickering in my rearview mirror, I realized this wasn't the hardest thing I'd ever done. It was the easiest. I just never let myself believe it could be. I never planned on becoming the family banker. It just sort of happened. One missed car payment here, a bounce check there. Then a call about utilities, then groceries, then Jake's overdraft fees again. And every time I told myself, it's just this once. But just once became a running tab. I didn't realize I was building a silent ledger, not of debt, but of resentment. You see, it's one thing to help someone you love. It's another thing to be expected to save people from their own refusal to swim. My parents always had a way of rewriting the narrative. My dad's bad back meant he couldn't work, even though I saw him lift a whole love seat once to chase the dog out the door. My mom's career break somehow lasted 5 years, during which she became more skilled at spending than saving. And Jake. He was just finding himself, which really meant gaming 12 hours a day and applying to fake jobs to keep up appearances. Meanwhile, I was wiring money like a machine, every Friday like clockwork. Groceries, cell phone bills, the heating bill that mysteriously doubled every January. They'd send guilt-laced texts and I'd respond with cash and silence, because that's what I thought loyalty looked like. But the thing about being the responsible one is that no one ever asks if you're okay. They just assume you'll show up strong, stable, and solvent. The golden goose who doesn't get tired, or angry, or empty. Until that Christmas night cracked everything open. After I walked out, I went home and opened my banking app. I wasn't looking at numbers. I was looking at a history of how much I'd lost emotionally, how many moments I'd bought for them, at the cost of my own peace. There's a reason banks keep ledgers. It's not to shame. It's to account for value. And somewhere along the way, I realized I was spending mine on people who didn't even recognize the currency. To them, money was expected. Gratitude was optional. And I was invisible unless my wallet was open. So I closed it. Not just the account, the whole emotional pipeline. Because I didn't want to be a ledger anymore. I wanted to be a person again. A few days after the Christmas fiasco, my mom texted me, "Come over for dinner. We just want to talk." No apology, no mention of Jake's insult. Just that same script they always pulled when they sensed the golden goose had flown too far from the coop. I went. Not because I hoped things would change, but because part of me still wanted closure, or at least confirmation that I wasn't crazy for walking away. The house felt smaller somehow. Maybe because this time I saw it clearly where I used to see warmth, and family I now saw dependents wearing a festive mask. Mom greeted me like it was Thanksgiving, too cheerful, too rehearsed. Jake was slouched at the table, glued to his phone like I didn't exist. Dad tried making small talk about the stock market, which was almost comedic, considering I'd paid their electric bill last month. Dinner was awkward, forced smiles, clinking forks. No one addressed the elephant in the room or the envelope, until dessert. That's when Dad finally dropped the act. He set his spoon down, leaned in like a used car salesman, and said, "Son, I know things got out of hand. But let's talk perspective. Money complicates things. We're sorry if it felt like a joke. But if you could just help us through February, we'll have things sorted." There it was. Not an apology, a pitch. Apparently he had a lead on a job. Jake was thinking about taking a course. Mom nodded like she was in on the script. "It's just bad timing, sweetheart. You know how life gets." And I realized sitting there that they hadn't heard a word I said on Christmas. This wasn't about healing, it was about resuming, as if nothing had happened, as if I could be guilt-tripped back into submission with a warm casserole and a carefully timed sob story. So I said it clearly. "This isn't about February. This is about years of me covering your rent, fixing your car, bailing out Jake's overdrafts." And in return, I got laughed at. Jake finally looked up and muttered, "Nobody asked you to." That was it. I laughed once quiet, then I stood left of my key on the hallway table and walked out without another word. Because I wasn't being pitched anymore. I was closing the deal for good. It's strange how being treated like a person can feel revolutionary. After I walked out of that dinner, I didn't go home to silence. I went home to Amanda, and even though she didn't know all the details yet, she didn't push, she just gave me space. Quiet space, safe space. Then came the invitation. "My dad's fixing up the garage shelves. Think you could help him this weekend?" It sounded casual, but I knew what it was, a test maybe, or a door cracking open. Either way, I said yes. Saturday morning, I showed up expecting awkward small talk, but Amanda's dad handed me a wrench and said, "Let's make this thing level." That was it. No background check, no probing questions. Just trust immediate, unearned, and yet somehow real. We worked for 2 hours in that cold garage, talking about rusted cars, power tools, and how screws always go missing at the worst time. Nothing deep, nothing dramatic. And yet, it meant everything. Then he asked, "You hungry? We've got leftovers." That lunch turned into dinner, that dinner into a weekend invite, then a New Year's brunch. And with each small gathering, something settled inside me, something I didn't know was loose until it clicked into place. Amanda's mom remembered I liked banana bread and baked it the next day. Her cousin asked me about my job like it mattered. Her little nephew wanted me to show him how to grill. No one asked for anything. No one joked at my expense. No one looked at me like a wallet with legs. They just saw me, and it undid me more than I expected. Because I realized my whole life I'd mistaken obligation for love. I thought being useful was the same as being wanted. But this family, they didn't want me because I fixed things. They liked me because I showed up, as myself. I found myself smiling more, sleeping better, texting Amanda's dad about car parts, arguing with her mom about apple varieties at the farmer's market, laughing at dinner without scanning for insults. And one night as I was helping her aunt fold chairs after a baby shower, it hit me I didn't feel like a guest anymore. I felt like I belonged. Not because I earned it, but because finally someone believed I did. It was a Tuesday evening when the knock came. Cold outside, quiet inside. Amanda was out with her sister, and I was halfway through folding laundry when I opened the door, and there stood my father. No warning, no call. Just standing there in his windbreaker like we were still in the years when he could barge into my life unannounced and be welcomed. He didn't wait for an invite in, just stepped across the threshold and stood in the middle of my living room like it still belonged to him. No small talk, no preamble, just, we need to talk. I leaned against the wall and waited. We're 2 months behind on the mortgage, he said. There's a notice taped to the door. Final warning, they're talking foreclosure. He looked up at me with eyes that weren't quite pleading, but they were close. We need $8,000 to get current. I didn't speak. So he kept going about how he'd been applying for jobs, how the disability case was still pending, how Jake was thinking about a course. It's just bad timing, he said. We just need this one time. Then I asked one thing. Where's Jake right now? He looked at the floor. In his room, playing something? Of course he was. Then came the closer. If we lose the house, your mom, it'll destroy her. That's when I knew nothing had changed. Not one thing. This wasn't a wake-up call for them. It was just another withdrawal attempt, another overdraft on my patience, my savings, my soul. I took a breath. I'm sorry, I said, but I'm not loaning you anything. Not $8,000, not $800, not $8. His face contorted some mix of confusion, betrayal, and disbelief. So that's it, he asked. You're just going to let your family drown? I stared at him and replied, no. I'm not letting anyone drown. I was the one keeping everyone afloat while no one learned to swim. I'm done being the life raft. That line hit him. He went quiet, but then he just had to say it. I should have known you'd turn your back when things got hard. That was it. I opened the door. You need to leave. He did. No more words, no fight. Just silence and a gust of cold air. And for once, that silence felt like peace. 3 days after that final no, I got the message. It wasn't from my dad. It wasn't even directly to me. It was a group text, one of those scattershot blasts my mom sends when she wants to skip the accountability and aim for pity. Hi, family. We're in a bit of a crisis and trying to raise funds to save the house. Anything at all helps. Thank you and God bless. Attached was a link. A GoFundMe. I clicked it. There it was, our house. Front porch sagging, old wreath still on the door, a funding goal of $8,000. The description read, unexpected hardship. Please help us keep our home. No mention of Jake. No mention of how they got here. Certainly no mention of me, the guy who'd been plugging holes in their sinking ship for 2 years straight. A few aunts commented, chiming in with $100 here, sending prayers there. I read it all, waited for a line, a word, something that even remotely acknowledged the truth, that someone had already given until they bled. It never came. 3 days later, Jake texted me. Hey, things are bad. I'm selling my PC, trying to scrape together what I can. Can you help cover the rest? You'll get it back. I swear. No apology, no greeting, no humility. I replied with one word. No. Seconds later, a follow-up. Wow. You're seriously just gonna let us lose the house? This time I didn't respond at all. Amanda and I went to her cousin's birthday that weekend. Laughter, potluck, food. Someone's kid accidentally putting salt in the cake mix. Honestly, it felt like a different planet. Her dad asked if I'd help fix a window screen. I did. No one joked about owing me a favor. No one kept a mental invoice. They just treated me like I mattered. Later that night, another message popped up from my mom. Just a link. The GoFundMe again. This time I donated $1 anonymous, no note, And for the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't being pulled back in. Like that old version of me, the fixer, the rescuer, the always needed, was finally done bleeding. They weren't reaching out to heal anything. They were just reaching for the next handout. And I had finally closed mine. It happened on a weekend that felt too quiet to trust. Amanda and I were at her cousin Julia's lake house, just one of those casual invites you say yes to, because you're trying to be polite. I didn't expect anything more than board games and maybe a hangover. But Friday night, Julia's husband Brian pulled me aside. He said he'd been meaning to chat. We stepped out onto the porch, the lake stretching out in the dark, and he started talking about work. Turns out he's a partner at a boutique consulting firm. Nothing massive but steady, quietly successful. They were looking for a project manager with a tech background. He didn't know much about me, just what Amanda had told him, that I was dependable, organized, and, in his words, not a jackass. That apparently goes a long way these days. We talked for maybe an hour. Tools I've used, how I think through projects, what kind of work I avoid. It wasn't an interview, not really. It felt more like someone asking if you know how to handle yourself when things go sideways. By Sunday morning, I had a tentative offer. More flexibility, less stress, better pay. But it wasn't just the numbers, it was what it meant. This wasn't a favor. It wasn't a handout. It wasn't someone trying to reel me back in because they needed something. It was someone choosing me. Not because I owed them, not because I was the only adult in a sea of dependents, but because I'd shown up and stood steady. And that counted. Amanda found me on the dock later that morning. I was just staring out at the water like it held answers. She asked, "You okay?" I nodded. "Yeah, just processing." Because the truth was, something in me had always believed I'd never get this peace, this opportunity, this normalcy without giving something up, without bleeding first. But here I was, whole, not broken, not begging, and still, it had come. The old fire of needing to prove my worth, of needing to be everything for people who gave me nothing, it hadn't burned out. But I'd walked away from it, and the warmth I'd found on the other side, it wasn't fire, it was family. I used to think silence was a punishment, that if the phone didn't ring, if no one knocked, if there were no messages with guilt woven between the lines, something was wrong. That maybe I was wrong. But now silence feels like sunlight after a storm. It's peace, not absence. It's clarity, not loneliness. Amanda and I went back to the lake a month later, just us. No expectations, no drama. We grilled burgers. She read while I skipped stones. And when the stars came out, I looked up and realized I hadn't thought about my old life in days. Not because I was running from it, but because it no longer defined me. That's the thing no one tells you. Healing isn't loud. It's not fireworks or speeches. It's walking past a store you used to avoid. It's deleting a contact without shaking. It's smiling when someone says you've changed, because finally you have. If you're watching this and you've been the one holding the family together with duct tape and overdue kindness, let me say this. You're allowed to stop. You're allowed to choose peace over obligation. You're allowed to let go. Not everyone will understand. Some may call you cold, ungrateful, but they don't know what it cost you just to stay. Let them wonder. And if this story meant something to you, stick around. There's more where this came from. Stories that heal, stories that remind you you're not alone. Hit subscribe. We've got more to tell.